deteriorated into some sort of like Jim Jones-esque cult of total insanity. They have been pretty good at keeping a reasonable amount of control over the organization, and to that extent, you know, they get praise, and this is one of the things that I think people are looking for them to do. You've got this crazy, you know, pseudo-satanic, in quotes, group, and, you know, you've got leaders that are keeping a lid on things. But there's another dimension. People are also looking for charisma. They're looking for charismatic individuals with powerful personalities and exciting, wild ideas to stimulate them and inspire them. And so there's a balance, and a lot of times those are the people look to for leadership. They want those people to lead them. They're attracted to those people, and so there's a dynamic going on. And if there's too much middle-class stability, it leads into boredom and boring Presbyterian church-like activity that excites no one and, you know, people drop out of. And if it goes in the other direction, well, it tends to blow up like Jack Parsons and go out of control in the other way. And you can look at both these leadership dynamics as being indications that people don't really understand the Thelemic material, that they're substituting either a middle-class daddy, father type, or a wild and crazy Pan-like figure, you know, but at no point are they actually taking responsibility themselves for their own direction and their own purpose. So, you know, they're foisting responsibility onto these other figures, and I think we need to look at that element to it as well.
Well, I mean, this isn't the first time that's happened. I mean, this is about as common in religious organizations as it gets. You've been talking about this recently in your blog. I mean, you cite, you know, from a friend of yours, Paul. I mean, Paul did this with Jesus. So you've got all of these people where Paul is saying to them, you know, follow me, I'll show you the way to Christ. And, you know, and it seems kind of odd to me that here you have this vicarious way to God through Jesus, but then you've got Paul saying, well, you know, to get to Jesus, you know, follow me.
Right. Well, again, I mean, I think that in looking at this substitution, you know, are leaders that are genuinely bringing you to the reality of the Thelemic experience, or are they substituting for a reality that's too intense for you to face? And if you're somebody who really isn't committed to doing the incredibly difficult and dangerous work that it takes to master the Thelemic material, and we're not egalitarians, we know that most people are never going to attain with the system. It's not something that, if everyone could easily attain with Thelema, then the world would look vastly different than it does, and the OTO in particular would look vastly different than it does. In fact, it's very difficult. So if you're looking for somebody to take you to that very difficult place, that's one kind of leader. If you're looking for somebody to take you away from that kind of place and to make you feel better for not having gone to that kind of place or wanting to go to that kind of place, then that's another kind of leader. And unfortunately, I think that there's been a migration away from Crowley, which even some of the leaders in the OTO admit to. When they can't sell the books and when the members aren't that interested in Crowley, they'll admit, yeah, there's a migration away from Aleister Crowley. What they don't want to talk about is who's leading the migration. And oftentimes I think the migration away from Crowley is being led by leaders in the organization who themselves have a lot of conflicts with Crowley's teaching, especially with the Book of the Law, and who really, you know, want to provide some sort of occult, you know, substitute, which is warmed over secular humanism or sort of a liberal Unitarianism in exchange for the really transgressive and difficult parts of the Thelemic core materials. So you have to look and sort of test your leaders and say, are these people leading us to a challenge and to really difficult things, or are they leading us away from a challenge? And I think this is really where the Thelemic community's leaders are failing, because they have chosen to lead their members away from challenges rather than lead them towards challenges.
Well, I think that's also reflected in the occult community itself. I mean, as you've pointed out previously, there's kind of a lull in the whole occult, you know, community in general. There's a little activity here and there, but there's not a lot going on. You've got people, you know, getting together and doing their little business meetings and maybe doing some kind of personal ritual here and there. But, I mean, as a whole, the occult community is not producing material and activities and so forth like it was in the 60s and 70s and so forth.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it's interesting to look at that lull and to see it and say, you know, what's really going on here? Why is this happening? And, why do we see such little meaningful occult activity going on? And you started that E-list, I chided you for not having really done too much with it, and you said, "Hey, look, there really isn't that much going on," and it's true. There really aren't that many exciting books coming out. There really aren't that many exciting communities working on this stuff. It's really a larger, almost occult biorhythm that we're seeing in the zeitgeist, where it's just it's at a low point, and it happens. I mean, it happens. It happened in the 1950s, for example. It's happened in other places. So I wish I had more of a line on why it was happening, but I don't.
In the 80s, there in early 90s, there was this huge zine and occult newsletter thing. I remember when I started getting involved in the early 90s, I mean, there was just this enormous amount of zines and newsletters and stuff on bulletin boards and just people. I mean, I would say the majority of it was crap.
Right.
But it's not being done. I mean, you would think it would be even easier today with things like Publisher or even just web pages that have really good content that the crazy people who are making zines are putting out on web pages. But it's not there. You go to the Thelemic, you search on Thelema and start looking at these web pages. It's the same thing. They have the same graphics. They have the same dumb statements about, who they are, and then they just do a bunch of reprints of Crowley. And nobody's really creating anything.
Well, I think part of the problem is that it's difficult to produce meaningful work. It really is. It's not the egalitarian myth that occultism is easy and that anyone can do it, or that Thelema can be anything you want. If it could be, and if it was like that, we would see a vastly different scene than we do. In fact, it's very difficult. It's not easy to produce meaningful material. And what people avoid looking at, and I think this is fascinating, is the way in which people pick up and leave the occult. You've been involved in the community for a long time. I've been involved for over 20 years. And new people don't realize that the people around them in the occult scene right now will not be there 5 or 6 years from now. They won't be there 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. Many of these people come in, they seem really enthused and excited about it, they seem like it really matters to them, but after a while, they get tired of the fact that it's really much harder than they want it to be, and they give it up and they move on, and oftentimes they forget they were even involved. And it's fascinating for me to sort of see that process. And I liken it to somebody who tries to pound a square peg into a round hole for a while and sooner or later gets tired of it and moves on to something else. And often the people who have stayed in the community for a long time, and this is a point a friend of mine, a younger friend of mine raised, I thought it was very prescient, they stay there because there's really nowhere else for them to go. It's not that they've mastered the material, they just don't know where else to go. And this is kind of comical, it's kind of sad in some instances, but where are the really fabulous, exciting, challenging occult thinkers and writers right now? And we're just not seeing that.
Well, I'm wondering if it is a result of consumer culture, short attention span, and all of the distractions that are out there. There wasn't a lot of strange or occult-like production outside of these communities in the early 90s and the 80s. In fact, it was shunned. I mean, you can think of the anti-satanic movement that was during the 80s. Today, you don't have to go into occult groups or research it. You can just turn on the WB or whatever and see The Craft, or you can go out to some movie store and rent all of these occult-like movies and get your kind of strange fix from it, and live vicariously through these characters who are involved in witchcraft or occultism or demonic possession or whatever. I mean, think about when The Exorcist came out and how unique that was, or Rosemary's Baby, and how strange and fascinating that was. Those movies now are commonplace. So people,
I think that has a lot to do with it. I also think that there's so much information in the consumer culture right now, or just available to people via the internet, through Netflix, through TiVo, through cable, that they don't really have time to sort through the vast amount of popular culture that's available at a very small price. It's not so much a matter of affording a movie. It's affording the time to watch all the DVDs or movies you have. I mean, I probably have 50 DVDs at my house that I haven't seen. And it's not because I don't want to, it's because I just don't have the time. I have to sit down and really make the time to do it. And we're so busy, we work longer hours than we used to in America. These are all contributing factors. But I tend to think that there is still other issues, because in other periods of time there have been occult revivals and then periods where there hasn't been a lot of production or activity. And periodically it comes back into fashion again. Periodically people are attracted to it. And I don't discount the idea that there could be forces and powers operating deep below the surface that are controlling the appearance and disappearance of this kind of activity.
Well, then, what do you think, assuming there's something that people could do or influences other than those kind of the occult invisible hand, you might say, what do you think people can do if they're looking to have a more revived?
I think the most important thing they can do is to really investigate this material on a personal level. I think that all of the great advances in occultism, from Crowley, even to people like Austin Osman Spare, Jack Parsons, and others, came about because people were tired of a hands-off academic approach. They were tired of looking at everything theoretically and at a distance, and instead decided to immerse themselves as individuals as completely and utterly in the material as they could. And that's a huge risk. It's a huge risk whether there's an internet full of stuff available to you or no internet at all. It's a risk if you're a poor Jewish guy in a ghetto in the Middle Ages in the 1500s, and it's a risk if you're a disaffected stoner character in the 2000s in Los Angeles. It doesn't matter who you are, it's always a risk. And the people who take that risk and really, really look for a deep personal experience with the materials, those are the people who become productive. Those are the people who become interesting. Those are the people who become leaders, real leaders, and authentic leaders that matter and who last. The more you avoid that personal involvement and connection, the more you consign yourself to, boredom and nothing. So that's my suggestion to people, is to really take a very, very personal interest and put a personal stake in it. And even if you don't attain everything that you want, you can still say, I gave it my all, I got really involved in it myself, I didn't just live it vicariously or through other people's work, it was something that I did, it was my experience, and you can own it in that unique way. And I think that the problem that we have in the community today is that there's almost a surfeit of ways, as you said, to vicariously live through it, whether it's watching a terrible sitcom or bad horror movie on TV, all the way up to, reading bad beginner books by lame figures in the occult community who are trying to explain things to people rather than, get them to do it themselves. So there's that, problem as well. And I think that it's easier now for people to take that hands-off attitude. And you see this, I hate to say it, in the sort of academic approach to the occult, where no one talks about their personal experiences with it. Everybody treats it as in a sort of distanced way. And, you have people kind of almost competing to see how far they can remove their own experiences and personality from the material. So, the more commitment people make to it as individuals and the more they plunge themselves into it. And it's still scary and difficult to do. And the internet doesn't take away the scary and difficult part. It changes it, but it doesn't take it away. The risk and the danger is always going to be there. And the people who come through that risk and that danger will be authentic occult figures of import, and the people who refuse to do it will be losers who will not produce anything.
Well, I think that's a good point and a good place to end this conversation. So thanks again for being on the podcast, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks for having me, John. 93.
Thanks again to Keith for being on the show. I always enjoy our discussions, and from what I can tell, the majority of listeners do too. Now we're going to move into the interview with Frater W.I.T. and that is about an hour long. And we get into a lot of really specific details in his book.